Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Budget season, taxes, and more at the County Commission tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by Mikkel Lowry, Chairman of the Shelby County Commission. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. You're in budget season. You're trying to get a budget passed here in the next month or so. We'll talk about some of the big ticket items, maybe even some of the small ticket items. One of the biggest, clearly, with the budget is it was a toss-up whether I would start with Regional 1 and the big expansion and investment there or schools. But let's talk about schools.
Okay.
The school board brought its budget to you all. It's about a $2 billion budget. Mm-hmm. It includes things like a new $27 million for a new salary schedule, taking the base rate, the starting pay up to $47,000. There's $37,000 investment in safety and security upgrades. There's $10 million that would go towards a Fraser High School that ultimately would be a $100 million high school, and $66 million total in capital projects. But also TCAP scores just came out, and it was up from the previous year, but there's a lot of challenges and we're talking about specifically Memphis Shelby County schools right now, but you also fund part of the suburban school districts. And you've got a superintendent search that isn't really going very well for Memphis Shelby County schools. It's been off and on, and you may have a different take on that. But so when you all look at that, how do you be appropriate stewards of the county's money to one of the what everyone agrees is one of the most important expense, I think everyone agrees, one of the most important outlays of money the county can make?
Sure. Well, it's really easy for us. We're bound by the charter what our responsibilities are, regardless of what test scores may be, regardless of what's going on in the superintendent search, regardless of what needs the school board says they need or don't need. We have an obligation to maintain our maintenance of effort, as you all know, was to give the same amount that we gave in the previous year. Now, in a perfect world, would those have some metrics tied to social? Of course, we would love to be able to say, hey, where's enrollment? What are TCAP scores? What are going on with other aspects of the business? But unfortunately, for us, that's not our job. That's the school board's job to do. So for us, it's to look at what the needs are from the school board standpoint, to take their budget, to see where the needs are, especially for new schools. We're passionate about the schools you mentioned in Fraser. That's been talked about for so many years, and I have to say biasly, I represent part of Fraser. Also, we have the needs with the new Cordova School as well, which we've been obviously mandated by the state to take some action on. So those things that we take first and foremost. Those other things we have to kind of block out the noise a little bit because we have a charter obligation.
Do your constituents understand that? Does the average citizen?
Of course not. Of course not.
I love the honesty.
Yeah, but no, it is.
And how do you explain it the same way?
Well, I have to. I have to. Think about this. How many things typically can you point to where you're the funding mechanism but have no say-so or where the money goes? Yeah. So we can't say, hey, we'd love to raise teachers' pay. We're going to put a line item in your budget that says, here's money for teacher salaries. That's not our responsibility. We can't do that. Now, the school board can bring their budget to us and say, hey, we plan to use this money for A, B, and C. And we say, great. But we can't say, hey, you have a facility need here. Use it there. So there's not many things that we're all used to where there's somebody's a funding body for any organization but has no say-so of the line items. Yeah,
and the same is true for the suburban schools, a portion that you fund of that?
Same is true for any schools. Obviously, through a factor of format that any money that we give to any schools also supports the suburban schools as well. But same issue. We don't, again, give line item to where that money goes to.
And once that's passed, I mean, it is striking for people. Biggest expense in the county, right? Biggest expense that goes through the county commission.
Right. 60%.
There just aren't those leverage points.
There just isn't. I mean, that's the way our government's set up. I mean, we have a school board that's elected to make those decisions. They direct the funding. We administer the funding. Again, we have a good collaboration with the school board, with the superintendent. The superintendents always come to speak to us and gives us the questions, the answers we need. But we don't have the right to say, you can't spend that here, you should spend that there.
Let me get Bill in here.
Let's talk about Regional 1. Regional One Health has a plan to basically rebuild the campus and the medical center district. About $700 to $750 million undertaking. Some figures are higher than that. But county government share of that is $350 million. And the mayor has proposed a budget that would start the road to that over about a 5-year period. And would be the first money in, with anticipation that there would be state and federal money. To finance this, he has proposed a wheel tax hike, $50 more on the wheel tax, to create about $30 to $34 million in revenue, new revenue, a year for that. That's the outline of it. But the wheel tax needs 9 votes to pass. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it has to pass 2 times at 2 regularly scheduled meetings, and the commission has 2 regularly scheduled meetings in June, right up to the July 1st start of the fiscal year. So as we sit here today on the Thursday, the day after committee meetings where there was a lot of discussion about a lot of topics, are there 9 votes on the commission for the wheel tax, do you think?
Well, Bill, we'll see. I mean, my job is to count votes, but my job is not to talk about where the votes are in the public. Obviously, I believe there's support. Let me stop here. There's support for Regional One from every commissioner. So let me start. Every commissioner's on record saying they support Regional One and want to see, obviously, it be upgraded to the status that it needs to be. All right, we'll start there. Now, how do we fund it is the issue. So I know there are some people who support the wheel tax. I've only seen one plan so far, and that's the mayor's plan. There are other plans coming forth. I look forward to seeing those as well. But we need increased revenues at the end of the day. We can't do this without it. We can't do Regional One or the schools or any other project. I know those 2 get the most of the recognition, but there are many other needs that we have in this county, as well as with infrastructure and with other schools. We can't do any of that without increased revenues. And how do we get revenues? Property tax, fees and fines. And that's in the sales tax, which we're already topped at. We're one of the highest in the state, as you all know. So then where do we get revenue from? So we either find things that we can cut, and I don't know what we can cut to that drastic number. Again, I'm open to seeing all ideas, but I'm supportive of the projects. At this point, I've only seen one plan, so I'm supportive of the plan.
Okay. And during the Wednesday committee meetings, Mayor Harris took a few steps to add some conditions to this to perhaps nail down some more votes on the wheel tax hike. And that was that the commission would have a regular updates on how the project is going from Regional One, and specifically how the state piece of this is moving, because some of your fellow commissioners have said, well, okay, our money is going to be the first in, but how do we know that the state is going to commit to this? How do we know that this academic authority that everybody's talked about, where the state in essence becomes a co-owner of Regional One with the county, how do we know that that's going to happen as well? Do you think that made this easier for any commissioners in terms of the wheel tax vote?
That would make it extremely easier. I mean, we would love to have a letter from the governor that says, here, this is what we're going to do. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. I've had conversations with many people, our representatives at the state. I know they're committed. I believe they're bought in. I believe the state will have some involvement in it. But we don't have a letter from the governor saying this is what he plans to do. We would love to have that. I think that would make it a lot easier for all of the commissioners, not some. I think all the commissioners would love to see that reassurance. But again, the state will be in a co-ownership position. They will have some responsibility there. That goes without saying, in my opinion. So I believe there will be some buy-in and some support from the state going forward.
It seems like you will, if this does not pass this coming Monday, that you do have some time here to explore alternatives. Commissioner Mick Wright has suggested some alternatives. There has been some talk about possibly going to a 2-year cycle for property reappraisals instead of the current 4, to deal with the $27 million hole, I think, that the sales ratio on personal property and state utilities has kind of challenged the budget process with, but would also be a reappraisal of real estate property values too. So you have a few things kind of at the edges of the spotlight.
Sure, there are
here.
a couple things and a couple levers hopefully you can pull, but you just mentioned a couple things, especially appraisal. You still need states' involvement. You need states' approval. We approved that last term with a 2-year appraisal cycle. The state said no. Want us to do it again. Supposedly the state's going to say yes this time. But that still needs the state's involvement, just like we love to have the involvement from a revenue standpoint to have a commitment. So there are a couple avenues we can look at it. Again, you're right, Commissioner Wright did propose some things in committee. I think that needs to be fairly vetted, but again, appreciate him for at least bringing some things to the table. But I think at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out how can we get this done? And maybe there's a meeting of the minds with multiple plans. Let's see all the plans on the table. And maybe there's some negotiation that needs to be played and say, hey, how do we make it work? Because what we can't do is do nothing at the end of the day. If you haven't been by Regional 1 lately, you should go by and take a tour. You'll be depressed. You'll be depressed and also encouraged by the people who are working there, who are working with the babies and the mothers and the people who are injured. But then you'll say, wow, they have air-conditioned vents where they have just piping going through ICUs. There are people in the hallways because they don't have enough beds. They have generators that look older than I am, whatever that may be. And if power goes out, whatever that may be, and those generators fail, people die at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, where a lot of people, thankfully, don't have to go to Regional 1. The people who are due are so much grateful for the support it has. But if you go see that facility and you say that's the county's responsibility, you say something has to be done.
The wheel tax over several decades, over I think about the last 40 years or so that we've had the wheel tax, is probably the most controversial tax that there is in county government. Arguably, it's less popular than the property tax and raising the property tax. What has the reaction that you've heard from your constituents been to the idea of raising the wheel tax?
Let me and just say so far, although you guys are still in committee, Mayor Harris has put, right now the wheel tax is $50, is that right?
Yes.
And there's Mayor Harris has put forward the idea of doubling to 100. And it is per, and this can help me out, Bill, or
It's not per wheel.
It's not per wheel. Is it per vehicle?
Yes.
It's per vehicle.
That's right.
And the same amount for personal vehicles and commercial vehicles?
No,
It's the
you
same?
have different amounts for commercial vehicles.
Okay.
But $50 is for the private vehicle that.
And that money is basically goes into the bucket and can be used towards capital projects. It can be used towards operating expenses. There aren't real restrictions on how it can be used.
Currently, the $50 fee now in the revenue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, is now all goes to education.
Okay.
So if there is a $50 increase in the wheel tax, the additional $50 and the $34 million in revenue that it would create would go to pay debt service, would go into a pay-go fund. In other words, money to pay for capital
And then
projects.
you would borrow to get that, whatever, $350 million.
That's right.
And okay. So go back to his question. I just want to make sure everybody understands what that wheel tax is.
That's a good point. And unfortunately, you're right about that. It's not being popular. No fault to our own, the people who are here now. So just kind of just a little bit of history lesson. The wheel tax was first implemented to put air conditioners in schools. And so when that was first brought up by previous administrations, things of that nature, a long time ago, then people thought that, well, why didn't it go away if we put air conditioners in schools? So previous administrations or elected officials didn't explain that correctly. Quite frankly, that's just to be honest about it. It still goes to education. It still goes to education, but at the same time, what it said it was for, that's done, and so now what's going forward? And unfortunately, sometimes you have some schools that still have some air conditioning issues, things of that nature. So that puts a little bit of bad light. I'm just going to be honest with about why people think it's so negative of it. So now, if we're talking about another hike on the wheel tax, some people remember that. Like, well, what are you going to do at this time? And so we put language, not to say if it passes or fails, but that 100% of that will go to these projects. There won't be any deviation going there. So that's why it's unpopular. Now, I don't know, Bill, property tax hikes are unpopular as well.
Yes.
Because if we don't have these increased revenues from a wheel tax standpoint, you're looking at almost an 18-cent property tax increase. Now, I'll tell you our property tax probably is a little bit low because we lowered it, probably when we shouldn't have, and not we. The previous county commissions lowered it in previous terms.
From it's right now at 395.
No, it's 339.
339.
But it used to be like 349. It used to be in the 340s.
Okay.
And it was lowered. And people always says, great, you're lowering property taxes. But every time you lower a penny, that's $2.3 million that you're taking away from services, things that need to be done. So while people have gotten a break on property taxes, obviously there's more needs that the county has. But I don't think anybody will say, hey, I'm okay with the 18 cents, one-time 18 cents hike on the property tax. I think that's the difficult path to get these things done.
You talked about services and the cutting of expenses and big broad numbers. I will not hold you where this is not a math test, but the big broad items that the county commission, the county funds, and you correct me where I'm wrong.
Yep.
I mean, we talked about schools. That's $2 billion. The sheriff's department budget goes through county commission.
That's right.
The jail goes through county commission.
Right.
Region 1 goes through county commission. What are the big ticket items I'm missing, and what are some of the small ticket ones that you're talking about? Like cutting expenses is not as easy as some people maybe want it to be.
Right. So you mentioned the big ticket items, but also think about healthcare as well. I mean, healthcare is a responsibility of the county, and then all of unincorporated Shelby County. So we're talking about roads, we're talking about speed bumps, we're talking about fire, we're talking about obviously you mentioned sheriff, but all those things, trash, whatever that may be, that's our responsibility as well. And people don't hear about that as much because obviously we have 7 municipalities which have their own forms of government and take care of those things. But anything outside of that purview is the county's responsibility. So those things add up at the end of the day as well. So some of the things that the people don't see a lot of, especially when we're talking about easements, things of that nature, sewer, those are all our responsibilities as well.
We'll move on. We're moving towards, again, end of the month, a vote on the budget and these questions. So it's coming up quickly. But we mentioned the sheriff, and obviously law enforcement, crime, criminal justice is heavy on people's minds in the last couple of years, especially it seems like in the last year. You all, one question that people have raised a lot, it seems, is bail reform. When are the accused or previous offenders released? Some of that goes through judicial commissioners that are appointed by the Shelby County Commission. You all, and help me if I get this wrong, in the past legislative session, the legislature passed a law that required an elected judge, which is not a judicial commissioner, but one of the elected judges, to make the release decisions when there's someone accused of a violent offender. That goes in July 1st into effect. You all voted 11-0 to ask the General Sessions Court judges to just start doing it now. Don't wait. Why? What does that mean? And is that an expression of displeasure about the judicial commissioners that you all have appointed?
No, I don't think it's a displeasure. It's one of those things that you just mentioned that the state has enacted. It's going to happen anyway, so why don't we just start it now? Something has to be done. We don't want people waiting around for trials on both sides. If we don't want innocent people having to wait around and sit around for a trial, that's unfortunate. And we want guilty people, if they're going to be found guilty, to go ahead and start serving their sentences as well. The Walter Bailey justice system, or as we all know, is 201, is not meant for long-term holding of people. Now, there's some upgrades need to be made there as well, but it's just not the facility for that. So we want people to have speedy trials, speed those things up so that people if they're innocent, let's get them back into society, and if they're guilty, let's get them serving their sentences. And so I think that's just one of those things that says, hey, let's start the process now.
What do you hear from your constituents about crime? I mean, and what is your sense, and what is your sense of the crime problem or challenge? Is it overblown? Is it spiking? I mean, there are people all over the place. Some saying, hey, this is really getting blown out of proportion. Others saying, I'm up and leaving. I mean, it's a huge topic. More so, my 27 years in Memphis, it feels like it's more of a topic than ever before.
Well, it's an important topic, and I don't think it's overblown. I think it's a reality for a lot of people. Crime is at your front doorsteps, no matter where you are, no matter where you live. And obviously, there's some parts of our county that have more crimes than others. But we got to get a handle on it. I mean, there's too many crimes being committed. I don't care if there's low theft crimes when it comes to cars and break-ins. Obviously, violent crime is up this year. So we just look at the numbers, and they're spiking. So it's our responsibility to find out how can we assist in those mechanisms. Obviously, speeding those trials up, which the county commission is responsible for, could hopefully be a help with that as well. Getting people off the street if they're guilty, and hopefully not having a bail reform that where people are not just having low bails and getting out, or people aren't left out on their own recognizance when they should be held guilty. So
yeah, I was going to go to bail reform because there's the bail reform that went in. We've talked about it quite a bit on the show. I think we have DA Mulroy coming back on the show in the next couple of weeks to talk about it some more. Some people point to it was bail reform, and suddenly everybody's being, quote unquote, everybody's being let out, and these unelected judicial commissioners are just letting people go. They're letting people go. Is that your sense of what's happening?
No.
Or is it at all transparent to you what's happening?
No, that's not my sense of what's happening. Again, there is a statistical formula that's set for bail. So it's not to a point where any judicial commissioner can say, hey, I think you should pay $1, and you pay $1,000, you pay $50,000. There's a formula that's set that they should follow. Now, have there been some things that we've all heard in the paper about people being let out on own recognizance as a mistake or things of that nature, clerical errors? Sure. Hopefully that doesn't ever happen again. But that's not my sense that people are just making those decisions. And plus the judicial commissioners that we appoint, they come highly recommended from judges and other people as well. So that's authority we have. We don't make those decisions in a vacuum. We interview them, and hopefully they're following the statistical formulas that's set inside for the bail reform.
On the road to this new bail court, the commission put in an amendment into there saying we would like to see data on the bails that are set, how much they are, whether the person reoffends, very specific data that go to the concerns that we've just been talking about here. And you wanted to start with looking at the run-up to the start of the bail court in February, the figures for sometime before that. And you haven't gotten that yet, have you?
No.
And that's something that I think the commissioners feel strongly about having going forward. So have there been some discussions with the court about that?
Sure. Again, this entire commission is concerned with data around a myriad of issues, but specifically when it comes to bail reform as well. If that's going to be our responsibility, quite frankly, both of you are right. We haven't heard about this issue being that much, getting that much popularity in the past. Frankly, we appoint judicial commissioners, we appoint them, and then we kind of move on to other business of the county. But there's so many things happening here, so we cannot just appoint and just have that in the vacuum where we're not having any more oversight. So we need to see the data, what's been done going forward, and hopefully that gives a little bit more eyes, a little more scrutiny. Now, we do get updates from the court system. They come and give us a quarterly update of what's happening. So I won't say that hasn't been happening in the past, but you'll see going forward that we'll have a lot more people, especially for our committees, more emphasis on the bills that are being set forth.
I think Judge Bill Anderson, who is over the judicial commissioners in general sessions, has been a frequent visitor to the commission the last several months or so. And you've also asked the judicial commissioners to do more than they were doing before this reform came up. Before, it was kind of a cursory review that would go to general sessions. Now it's a full-fledged hearing, right?
That's right. That's right. We just think those things will speed up the process at the end of the day. And that's what we should all want. Again, we don't want overcrowding for 201, and we want people who have speedy trials. Everyone should have access to that, and no one's sitting around waiting and waiting and waiting. And so we've heard from myriad of sides that we're backed up or we're not backed up. Again, for us, we need the data to understand that and help us make better decisions.
We did announce, last year looking at criminal courts in Shelby County, and I think we found, it was very difficult to find how many trials were actually finished, criminal trials were finished. I think our initial analysis was something in the 35 range. Some judges came back and said it was more than that, but in the end it was something in the 50, 55 range. That's partly because most trials are settled before they don't go all the way to a jury or to a judge's decision. But is there a need for more judges, more criminal judges, and is that something that the commission can make happen or influence?
Well, we can't say, our body can't say we put forth more judges. We'll have to take that to the voters to vote on that as well. But I think having the data will help us understand that and help make that case.
Right.
We have a certain amount of judicial commissioners that we're able to appoint. We love to hear from the court system if they need more, and obviously take those votes if we need to make that happen. But I think the data is going to help us understand that going forward.
We could do whole shows on these topics, but we've got 2 minutes left here. One is the youth curfew that the city of Memphis wants to put in. Jim Strickland, mayor, sat here some weeks ago and said, look, we want to enforce the curfew rule that has been on the books since, 96. We don't really want to hold these kids. It should be the county's responsibility, but we're going to try to figure it out. They were going to maybe use a community center. They've dropped that plan. It's not really clear what they're going to do with these kids. Does the county need to get involved in some form or fashion, be that the sheriff's office, the jail, community services, I don't know what, to help with the implementation of this curfew?
Sure, I think everyone should be at the table. Now, what you also didn't mention is juvenile court.
Sorry, yes,
that should be a conversation with juvenile court about what we should be doing there. There should be a curfew in place. We shouldn't have kids out on the street after a certain time, wherever they are. So, but at the end of the day, the sheriff's department, the mayor, MPD, juvenile court should be sitting at the table, along with community service, to figure out what's the right plan to do at the end of the day? Because doing nothing is not the answer.
And would that entail more funding for the juvenile court to have capacity? I mean, there's an issue of capacity and staffing. What do you do with these kids who are picked
Yeah, I'm
up?
sure it would be. And that's our job as Federal County Commission, is a funding standpoint, but we need to hear that directly from the juvenile court to determine what those needs would be.
And with apologies to Bill here, what the city council has going to put a referendum before the voters in August of 2024, outlawing assault weapons, putting restrictions on assault weapons, putting some gun control measures in place. The general consensus is that those would be struck down, that there's no, but at least it would be a message, is what I think some city council people have said. Mm-hmm. Have you all talked about anything like that? And if nothing else, as a message to the state and others that we want different gun control laws here in an urban area?
Sure, we've talked about it, and also that's been part on our committee as well, as having a joint resolution with the city council supporting that as well. Again, you're right, it probably will get struck down, but it's a message that should be sent as far as how these guns are having an impact on Memphis and Shelby County.
All right. We have much more we could talk about, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Bill, thank you. And thank you for joining us. If you missed any of the show, you can get the full episode at WKNO.org, or you can get it on YouTube, or you can download the full podcast of the show, iTunes, Spotify, Daily Memphian site, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.